All right, hello again, Graphic Design 1. So we're going to focus today on making things using Shape Builder. Okay, so last time we used just shapes and maybe the Pathfinder tool and some selection tools to make a castle. And this time we're going to use our Shape Builder tool, which is kind of like a more complicated version of the Pathfinder tool, right? So we're going to make a skeleton key. We're going to make like a vintage key. So this is my example that I made, and we're going to together make the key part. And then after we're done making the key, you guys are going to be able to add whatever filigree you want to make it look exciting. All right. So first thing that we're going to do is like this middle section of the key. So you guys see that there's like the part that somebody would hold on to, and then this middle section leading to the part that would go into the lock. So we're going to go ahead and make this middle section first. So I'm going to minimize that. For this assignment, I actually gave you guys a template. Okay, so on the Google Classroom, in the assignment that I gave you that says Skeleton Key Shape Builder, okay, you're going to see a template that will have all of these images in it, and it'll already have an artboard on it. So the way that you download that is you have to make sure that you click on those three dots in the corner when you see the preview of the template and open it in a new tab. And then after you open it in a new tab, you're going to see the download button. Okay, so you're going to download this template. And then after you do that, we're going to use some shapes just like we did before. So you can see here that in the template, I gave you guys some examples. I gave you some like inspiration for what your vintage skeleton key could look like. So we're going to kind of combine the top of this guy with like the bottom of some of these. So first thing we're going to do, like I said, is this little center post. So if you break that down into its basic shapes, essentially, it is a rectangle with some circles and some triangles, right? So let's go ahead and do that over here. So we're going to take a rectangle. We're going to make ourselves a post here. And then let's go ahead and change this so that it has a black fill and no stroke. So over here on our fill, we can make that black. And over here on our stroke, we're going to make that nothing. Okay. So I think that this could actually stand to be a little bit thinner. So let's go ahead and go to the side here and make that a little bit smaller. And then if we look at our inspiration again, we can see kind of the shapes that we're working with. So up here at the top is where I'm going to focus first. So we're going to use a circle, a triangle, and a rounded circle. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and make myself the circle first. So again, if you want to make a perfect circle, you hold shift. If you want to make a circle that's kind of squished, then don't hold shift. So I'm gonna make mine a little bit squishy. And then when you're working in the shapes tool, they're all live shapes. So what I mean by that is after you create it, the bounding box automatically shows up. So I don't actually have to go to my selection tool in order to move that circle. All I have to do, because you see I'm in my ellipse tool still, all I have to do is click on that little circle in the center, and it's going to turn into my selection tool. So I can move it by clicking on that circle in the center, and I can resize it by using the edges of my bounding box. So I'm going to put this on the end here, and then I'm going to switch shape tools to my rounded rectangle. And then I'm going to click and drag that rounded rectangle to make this little bit at the top. And then I'm also going to go in here with a triangle. So remember, there's two ways to make a triangle. You could use your star tool or you could use your polygon tool. I happen to think polygon tool is easier. Okay, so I'm going to go polygon. I'm going to create that polygon while holding shift so that it has a flat bottom. And then I'm going to drag that diamond up. Okay, so all of this has been reviewed so far from what we did with our castle. But the next thing is what's going to be new. So I'm going to go ahead and scoot this guy over here. And remember from our last assignment, in order to reflect something, you have to transform it. So if I want this guy to just be reflected onto the other side, I'm going to right click on him and then transform, reflect. And I do want him to go vertically, but I'm going to press copy. And then now I can drag that guy to the other side. So now I have this fancy looking like top section, right? Now mine is not exactly like this one, and that's okay, because we can make it our own, right? But I want you to put something at the top, kind of like this. And could I just group this together? Like, could I select it and then group it? Yes, right? But when we're working with more complicated images, this is going to be a lot of shapes. It's going to be a lot to have to load into the document each time. And sometimes you don't need to manipulate all of those shapes. Sometimes you want them all to be one shape, right? So this is where we're going to go find our shape builder. So over here in our toolbar, it's going to look like two circles overlapping each other with a mouse in the center. So when I click on that guy, or you could do the hotkey is Shift M as in Mary. Okay. So when I click on that, I'm going to get this mouse that has a plus sign next to it. Okay. Now, this mouse that has the plus sign next to it is telling me that I can create new shapes by clicking and dragging through the ones that are already there. Okay. So when I hover over these shapes, it's giving me a preview of the sections of that shape that I can connect. So if you ever happen to have like two shapes that are separated, so here, let me go back to my regular selection tool. If I move one of these triangles away, so if I scoot this triangle over where it's not touching anymore, and then I go try to use my shape builder tool, it's not going to connect. It's going to always be separate because it's not overlapping. Okay, so when you're using your shape builder tool, you need to have those spaces overlapping. Okay, so put it back. So now all I'm going to do with the plus sign there is I'm going to click and drag through all of these shapes. So you can see here it's giving me a preview. It's like, hey, everything that you just drug through is highlighted. So it's all going to become one shape. And then I'm going to let go of my mouse. And now I have this brand new fancy shape, right? So now that I have this new shape, let's go ahead and make a more complicated shape. So up here on the section that has these three circles, we're going to make that design. So we're going to start with our ellipse tool. And again, I'm going to make some perfect circles. And I want two larger circles. But instead of making two circles separately, let's just go ahead and make a copy of this one. So that way we know it's going to be exactly the same size. So I'm just going to go back to my selection tool and then hold Alt and drag this guy over. I'm also going to use that pink guideline to make sure that these circles are going to be exactly on the same line together. All right. And then from there, I can go back to my ellipse tool and make myself a smaller circle that's going to fit in between them. Cool. That looks better, right? Okay, so next thing we're going to do is we're going to make copies of these circles. So because you can see it's an outline, right? So I'm going to need to make copies of each of these and then make that copy smaller. Okay, so let's go ahead and click on one of these circles, and then we're going to do a copy. So we're going to hold Alt and we're going to drag it, which makes us a new copy of that circle. And then let's change the color so that we can see what we're doing. So we'll go ahead and change this to white instead and move it back over here. And then if you remember from the demonstration that I did with the house, if you want to make something smaller, but also have it go towards the center, you have to hold Alt, right? So if I just make this smaller without holding Alt, it's going to go to one side. But if I make it smaller while holding Alt, it goes towards the center. Okay, so I'm going to make this guy smaller to be about the size that I want the outline to be. So you can see here kind of what that's going to look like. And then instead of recreating that on the other side, you guessed it, we're going to make a copy. So we're going to hold Alt and drag this guy over. And again, we're going to use those guidelines to help us. But look, it's behind everything, right? So what I got to do is I got to right click, arrange, and bring it to the front. So that way I can see what's going on, right? Okay, so I'm going to repeat that process. So this guy right here needs a circle. So I'm going to click on it, hold Alt to make a copy. I'm going to change the color so that I can see what's going to happen. And then I'm going to resize it while holding Alt so that it goes towards the center. I'm going to try to kind of match what's going on here, right? Okay, so I think we're ready to start erasing parts of this, okay? So if you notice, this is an outline, and we kind of have the start of this outline happening here, but now we need to delete parts of it. So we're going to use our shape builder tool to do that. So the first thing I need to do is I need to select all of the shapes that I just made. So I'm going to select all 6 of those circles, and then I'm going to go to my shape builder tool. And then this time, instead of adding things, I'm going to take things away. So my mouse that has the plus sign, in order to turn that plus sign into a minus sign, I'm going to hold Alt. So again, I'm just holding Alt to turn that into a minus sign. And then again, it's going to give you a preview by showing you a highlight of what's going to get deleted. So I'm going to click and drag through these spaces so that I can delete these. All right, it's looking pretty good. All right, so I have a little bit of a dilemma here. If I zoom back out, do you guys see on the corners here, it's kind of got like a rectangle on the corner? So when you're using Shape Builder, you want to always think about how can I put multiple shapes together to get the design that I want. So I can see here that this kind of just looks like a rectangle, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come over here to my rectangle tool, and I'm going to add that rectangle where I think it needs to go. And then we need another one over here. And then I can reflect that guy and put him on the other side. Okay, so what I've done here is I now have a couple of different rectangles. So I have one longer one here, one smaller one here, and 2 reflected on either side, because I can see on my example that that's what I'm going to need to mimic this outline, right? So in order to make this change, I'm going to select all of my shapes first. If you don't make a selection first, then your shape builder is not going to work. It's just not going to exist, okay? So first you have to make a selection of all the shapes that you're trying to edit, and then you can go to Shape Builder or do Shift M as in Mary on your keyboard, okay? So here's what we got to do. We have to both add things to this shape and take away some things from this shape, okay? So let's take things away first. So I'm going to hold Alt to turn that into a minus sign, and I'm going to drag from this empty space into the sections here that I'm trying to remove. So you can see now that this part right here at the bottom is starting to look a lot more like this example that I have, right? So one problem though, if I zoom in really close, do you guys see how there's extra bits here that I don't need? And there's a piece here that I actually need to be filled in. So I'm going to hold Alt and delete the parts that I don't need. And I'm going to not hold Alt and just regular click through this space here in order to make it a solid section, okay? So if you missed that, it's going to be similar on the top. So if I come up here, I'm going to need to hold Alt to remove these spaces here. And then I can just regular click through the rest of it to turn it into one shape. Okay, so now I have something that is a lot more like the example, right? So from here, I'm just going to go ahead and put that onto the top of my post that I made earlier. So I'm just going to go with my regular selection tool, and it looks like I did a pretty good job sizing. Do you guys see that? It's almost perfect. However, if yours is not perfect, then I do need you to resize it, right? So I can come over here, click on that shape, and then I'm going to hold Shift and Alt, so that way I can make it go to the center and it's not going to lose its proportion, right? So if you need to change the size of the shape that we just made together, that is how you're going to do that, all right? So from here, I think you can kind of get most of the idea of how to move forward. So if we look at my example, you can see this is what we just did together. And then this key at the bottom, I made it the same way. Okay, so I'm gonna make this part on video right now. And then if you want to change anything about your key, like if you've watched until this point and you're like, I totally got how that worked, go ahead and change the bottom half of your key. You can use any of these examples that I've provided on your document. You can use any of these examples as what the bottom of your key could look like, right? So I actually, on mine, I used this one as an example. So I'll be able to show you exactly how I made that, okay? So if I know it's a little blurry, I know it's not a great picture, but if I look at it, I can kind of guess at what those shapes might be. So if I come in here with my rectangle tool, I can see that this is just a regular rectangle. And then I'm going to go ahead and flip the fill in the stroke so that I can see through it to see what the design is supposed to be. So remember, we do that over here on our fill in stroke. There's a little arrow. So I'm going to flip that guy. And then I'm still in my rectangle tool because I can use that rectangle again. So I've got another guy here and another guy here. And then remember that our rectangles do need to overlap each other. Otherwise, it's not going to work. And then I've got a circle there in the middle. So now I'm going to go with an ellipse and make a perfect circle and move that guy in there. Okay, so now I have kind of half of that key, right? And that's all I need because I'm going to reflect it after I make the design. So I can go back to my selection tool and move this picture out of the way so that I can select all of those shapes and make them bigger so they're easier to work with. So remember, when you're resizing things, you have to hold down Shift so that way everything's going to stay the same proportion. So here we go. So if I wanted to change this, like add any extra shapes, I could do that now. So maybe I want to add like just a little extra shape here and an extra shape over here. We'll see how that works. Okay, so now I need to select all of those shapes that I made. So I'm going to go with my selection tool. I'm going to select all of those shapes, and then I'm going to go to Shape Builder, and I'm going to click and drag through the parts that I want to make one shape, and I'm going to hold Alt and click on the parts that I want to delete. So I'm going to come over here and change this back to a solid color so that I'll know exactly what it's going to look like. So if I click and drag through here, then I'll know that that's all going to be one shape. But now the two shapes that are left over, I want to delete them. So I'm going to hold Alt, and I'm going to remove this one and remove this one. And then maybe I don't like how short it is over here. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my direct selection tool. And I'm going to click and drag over these two shapes right here, these two points. They're not shapes, these 2 points. And then I'm going to drag those out to kind of match this one over here. So that way it doesn't look so funky, right? I could also drag this side. So remember, I'm just clicking and dragging over the points that I want to edit, and then clicking on that point and dragging it out. So that way it can be longer. And then I'm going to go ahead and reflect that. So I'm going to bring that over to my key, drag it over here, maybe even make it a little bit bigger. trying to make it the correct proportion for my key here. Okay. And then instead of having to make that whole thing all over again, I'm just going to reflect it to the other side. So I'm going to right click, transform, reflect. I'm going to reflect it horizontally, and I'm going to make a copy. And then I can drag that guy down. And then now I have a really fancy looking bottom half of my key, right? Now, if I look at my example that I made earlier, I kind of like how much more simple this one looks. So if you make the bottom half of your key and you're like, that looks ugly, you can edit it still, right? So maybe I want to get rid of these parts. So what I can do is go back in there with another square on each side. And then I can select everything again and go to Shape Builder and hold Alt, and I can delete them. Maybe I don't like those parts, right? So now if I look at the whole thing again, I think it looks a little bit better. I think it might need to be closer together, might also need to be a little bit smaller. So I think you guys probably get the point. So I'm going to let you go ahead and add your own details here. Okay, so what you're going to do with any extra time is you're going to add extra details to your key. You can use these pictures as examples. I'm also going to give you a picture of my finished example here. And then I want you, after you finish the skeleton key, to add other details to it to make it your own. So if you just have a key on a white background, that's so boring, right? So I went in and I added like a flower with some leaves. And again, I made those using Shape Builder. So you can make whatever kind of details you want around your key, but I need you to add extra details so that it's something that you're excited about and not just a black key on a white background. Okay. So again, this has been how to use Shape Builder, and I'll see you next time.